Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm doing something that's not quite a review, but also maybe not a review. I actually haven't really talked about this book a lot on my channel, and as you can see from the title, it's definitely a book that I should be talking about quite a lot on my channel. So today we're going to be talking about House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. If you have not heard of this book, and you are part of the horror community, well, now you have. House of Leaves is probably one of the most talked about and debated novels currently in the horror community. I believe it came out in 2000. Yeah, I believe it's about 22 years old now. And to this day is still heavily raved about and hated on. I feel like most people are either in the they love this book or they hate this book. And today we're going to talk about why that is and what makes this book of all horror novels so interesting, what has made it so relevant for the past 22 years, why it is so heavily talked about, and why it is so heavily debated. So again, this is not really a review because I did read this book about 6 years ago. I read it at the very beginning of 2016, and I definitely probably had a very different experience reading this book than most people did because of the situation I was in. And I will get more into that as I go through. So this is definitely a book that you probably can't get as an audiobook. I don't think you can get it as an ebook either. You might be able to, but if you do, I would say maybe don't. As you can see, this is the remastered full color edition. I'm sure some of you are thinking, why does a color edition matter? Well, a color edition matters because you're going to have moments where color is actually important to the story, where we have things like blue boxes that appear and words highlighted and crossed out in the color red. So it's going to be very, very important. We're going to have the word house highlighted in blue quite a lot all over this book. It is very, very it is very, very pivotal that you get a full color edition of this book, in my personal opinion. I think that you really, even look, House of Leaves is even in blue on the cover. So I do think it is very, very important. Let me read the back of the book for y'all very quickly. Years ago, when House of Leaves was first being passed around, it was nothing more than a badly bundled heap of paper, parts of which would occasionally surface on the internet. No one could have anticipated the small but devoted following this terrifying story would soon command. Starting with an odd assortment of marginalized youth, musicians, tattoo artists, programmers, strippers, environmentalists, and adrenaline junkies, the book eventually made its way into the hands of older generations, who not only found themselves in those strangely arranged pages, but also discovered a way back into the lives of their estranged children. Now, for the first time, this astonishing novel is made available in book form, complete with the original colored words, vertical footnotes, and newly added second and third appendices. The story remains unchanged, focusing on a young family that moves into a small home on Ash Tree Lane, where they discover something terribly wrong. Their house is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Of course, neither Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist Will Navidson or his companion Karen Green was prepared to face the consequences of that impossibility, until the day their two little children wandered off and their voices eerily began to return another story, of creature darkness, of an ever-growing abyss behind a closet door, and of that unholy growl which soon enough would tear through the walls and consume all of their dreams. So when I first found out about this book, one of my best friends in the world, she worked in music journalism with me for years. She still does, I do not. But she recommended this book to me. She said it was one of the coolest things she had ever read, and I had just gone through a breakup, a very, very bad breakup, and I was house sitting and dog sitting in my friend's apartment, and she had a copy of House of Leaves sitting on the table. And she told me that she had read the first chapter and it scared her so much that she put it down and hadn't touched it since. And it just become this like coffee table book. And because I was sad and I was bored and stuck in a house, I decided I would pick it up and read it. Not realizing the absolute journey this book was going to take me on. I went in completely blind. I knew nothing about the book, and I believe it took me 3 weeks to read the entire thing, which is a very long time for me to read a book that I really, really like. And I didn't want to put this book down, and I didn't put this book down, and I would read it every single chance that I got, and it still took me about 3 weeks to read because it is that complicated to get through. One of the things that I always laugh at is a lot of people compare this book to Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, but like the spooky version. And that's kind of true, I would say. As somebody who's tried to read Infinite Jest 3 times and has never been able to make it through, this book is definitely easier to read than Infinite Jest, and I think a lot funner to read than Infinite Jest, but very, very similar. Danielewski really banks on stories within stories and footnotes that go all over the place in this kind of bizarre, like almost like cyclical narrative where everything is kind of intertwined, very frame story-ish. There's a lot to unpack in this novel. So the first thing I think I'm going to talk about is the structure of this book. I think the structure of this book is the most important thing to know before going into it. And it does start in very traditional fashion. You just get words on a page. Very simple. And as you go through, you will eventually get into a story within a story, and then your footnotes are going to start to appear. And you will notice that there are actually different parts of footnotes. There are footnotes from one author and footnotes from another author. This book is told through like 2 different people, one of them being this man named Johnny Truant, who is kind of your everyday man who is reading this book. As you continue through the book, it's going to get more and more strange and more complicated and more complex and more bizarre, just over and over and over again. You will have pages where the footnotes are longer than the words on the actual page. You will have pages where there's 1 word on an entire page. You will have very bizarre transcriptions of radio transmissions. You will have drafts that have been edited and words taken out. You will have words that are printed sideways. You will have pages of, I think these are poems? I actually don't fully remember since I haven't read this. I think they might be song lyrics, actually. And you will have weird jumbled messes like this. Just to give you a heads up, I think it's very important to know that this book is a challenge to read. I believe there's a chapter where you read the chapter and then you go back and you read certain words that have been differentiated from the chapter and you get another chapter within it. This is a very intelligent book. It clearly must have taken Mark Danielewski a very, very long time to write, and it is definitely work to get through. However, it is work that I think is worth the journey. You can't speed read this book. There's no shortcuts in this book. You have to read it. And like David Foster Wallace, I do believe it is one of those books that you do have to read the footnotes. And I know that this is kind of where the debate comes in. The 2 biggest problems that I see people have with this book are the horror elements of it and our narrator, Johnny. So let's talk about Johnny first. Johnny is... I didn't dislike Johnny. I'm going to say that right off the bat. But I don't think he's written to be a likable character. He's a very flawed character, but I liked him because he is a very real character, in my opinion. He is absolutely flawed, tormented, addicted. He has a lot of problems, and he's spiraling downwards throughout this entire journey of the book. And I think that's very, very important. And again, I had a very rare experience with this book because I had just been broken up with by somebody unexpectedly on the basis of I looked different. He wasn't thrilled that I was kind of alternative, that I had a lot of tattoos, that I worked in the service industry and didn't have like a 9-to-5. And that really, really stung, especially because we had been together for like a year at this point. And it was very unexpected. And when I read this book and our main character is somebody who I believe works as I think he's either an apprentice or a shop assistant at a tattoo studio. But he's very involved with alternative culture. And having that type of character be the voice of this story, especially when he's narrating I don't even know what the right word would be. He's sharing a story that he has discovered about these Pulitzer Prize winning, well put together, like nuclear family, but told from the perspective, or shared from the perspective of this kind of person on the outskirts of society. I really, really liked that. That being said, I can understand why a lot of people dislike Johnny as a character, and I don't think he's meant to be a likable character. He's also very much an unreliable character, and I think his dislikability and his flaws help contribute to the unreliability of him as a narrator, which I think is very, very, very important to what we're reading, because we don't really know what we're reading, and it's very unclear at the end of it exactly what's real and what's not. And that's kind of not the point of the book, too. It doesn't matter what's real and what's not, in my opinion. So that is Johnny. I think Johnny is a very important character to this novel. I understand why he's there. I understand why a lot of people don't like him, but I personally really liked what he added to this book. I thought it took something that's missing from a lot of modern day stories and brought that to the forefront of it. The next thing I want to talk about is this book scary? Because I see a lot of people who talk about House of Leaves being very scary and all the existential dread that they get from it, and then I get a lot of people who are like, what the hell did I just read? I do not think House of Leaves is a horror story. And I think the fact that I don't think House of Leaves is scary is probably why I don't talk about it enough on my channel. I think there's a lot of very dark themes to this book, and I think a lot of the horror from this book is not only from the unknown of the house and the mystery around this family and the story, but is also from the unknown of the mind. And I think Johnny as well as Karen are both really, really good characters to focus on with these levels of uncertainty and their own place mentally within the story. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the dread comes from, is we don't know what's going to happen to the characters in the story, and they know that they don't know what's going to happen to them. And I think that that's really, really scary, and again, it borderlines on that existential dread, but that's not, to me, horror. This is almost, to me, like just a metaphor for different types of anxieties and depression and uncertainties that people have in life. And it's very dark and it's very bleak, and I really, really love and adore how Mark Danielewski handles a lot of these topics. Luckily for me, and I'm not sure who told me this, and I really wish I remembered who, because I thought it was so profound and it helped me get through this book, and I'm not going to pretend that this was my idea, because it's not. But if you read this story as a love story and not a horror story, I think you get so much more out of it. And I am the last person who's ever going to be like, read a romance novel kind of thing, right? Like, romance novels are pretty much not my thing, especially contemporary romance novels, like just not my jam. And this book is not a romance novel, but deep within this book, at the core of it, this book is a love story. It's surrounded by very dark, uncertain things. And I think when you look at it more as unpacking like the love people have for each other versus the existential dread that is consuming everyone, you get a much better experience with this book than you would if you go in being like, I've heard this book is terrifying, because I don't think this book is terrifying. That being said, I also don't think a lot of Pet Sematary is scary, and I know a lot of people who have kids think Pet Sematary is the scariest thing that Stephen King has ever written. And so maybe from that perspective, this book could be terrifying. And again, lots of dark, scary places, lots of the unknown in this. Is this cosmic horror? Maybe. Does it tick off a lot of things that cosmic horror has? Yeah, it absolutely does. Would I classify this as cosmic horror? No. But I don't actually know what I would classify this book as, like, at all. I remember when I read this, I was like, what books are similar to the style and tone of House of Leaves? And I got, like, Gravity's Rainbow, The Raw Shark Text, and Infinite Jest, all of which I have not finished, or two of them I haven't even started yet. So it is kind of this weird postmodern, strange, stylistic amalgamation of the mind told through narrative, I guess you could say, which I feel like also talks about infinite jest as well. I don't know. It's Wallacean. David Foster Wallacean. If that's a word, it's a word now. I don't know. I've never read anything like it. But what I will say is I do adore this book. I do think this is one of the best books I've ever read in my life. I understand why a ton of people don't like this book, but to me, this was a 5-star read. I devoured this book, and I think it was worth the time and the work to get through to have the full experience with this book. I do not believe this book is a horror novel. I don't think it's scary at all, but I do think it's a really, really, really interesting set of concepts about different types of personalities and their reactions to different situations and the humanity of certain types of people. And I think it does an amazing job of expressing that, and it's so fun to read, and it's just this weird, mysterious world of uncertainty. The characters are all in these different planes of uncertainty, as is the reader, and we all just get kind of thrown in there together to go on this strange, strange journey. So if you have not read House of Leaves and you have the time and effort to really dedicate yourself to this book, I do think this is absolutely worth it. But if this does not sound like anything you are interested in, then you're probably not going to want to read it. Again, it is work to get through this book, but it is so worth it if you're willing to do the work. And you get so much out of it, and it just kind of has this lingering effect on you. There are scenes from this novel that have always just kind of stuck with me, and there's stylistic choices that Danielewski chose to do that I've always thought were just absolutely brilliant. And I always say this is a really good book to read if you're feeling down or sad, because it just takes you into such another world, and it has so many relatable characters that I feel like if you're in like a very like chipper mood, this book is probably going to bring you down, but if you feel pretty bad, it'll probably bring you up, which is a weird thing to say about a book. But yeah. Again, 5-star read for me. I read this 6 years ago. I don't know if I would ever read it again, solely because the experiences that I had of going into this book blind were so monumentally awesome with this book that I feel like I wouldn't be able to recreate that if I reread it. Maybe in like 20 years I'll revisit it and see if I have the same effect, but don't know if I would reread it anytime soon because it still really affects me to this day. And I still love talking to a bunch of my friends who have read it at this point about like what we think of the certain characters or what's going on. And we still have all these theories that we always chat about. And I just absolutely adore this book. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!